My name's Anglewicz. I've been working at Tulane since 2010 after spending 7 years in Philadelphia as a PhD student and a postdoctoral researcher. My training is in demography, which I think not a lot of people know about, but there are several classes at Tulane that focus on important demographic issues, including one of the classes I teach, which is on mortality trends and differentials over the past 250 years. So this class is something that I'm really excited about because one of the more profound social changes we've experienced over the past 300 years is a dramatic decline in mortality rates across populations and over time. So whereas maybe 200, 300 years ago we were living until, the average person lived until about 30s, 20s, 30 years old. Now some populations on the average live until their early 80s. And the trajectory has been increasing dramatically over the past 200 years. So this class talks a little bit about the reasons why and where life expectancy is going in the future. How long will this increase? The second class that I teach is kind of a nuts and bolts approach to doing research at the PhD level. It's called Research Approaches and is essentially a research design class specifically tailored for students in global health systems and development. So it starts with some of the basics like epistemology, how do we know what we know, how solid is our research evidence, and moves on to some of the basic mechanics of doing research like sampling, variable measurement, concept measurement, as well as establishing causal relationships as opposed to just associations between various concepts. Well, I guess my path that led me to public health started off in 1998 when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi. So I lived in rural Malawi for 2 years, and it was sort of during the peak of the AIDS epidemic there, where people were experiencing dramatically high mortality in these rural areas, and were also confronted with the uncertainty that confronted this spike in mortality that was visible and evident in these communities. So I lived there for 2 years and learned a little bit about what things were like culturally in Malawi, and that's been an incredibly important influence on the research that I do. So now I've moved on from studying HIV/AIDS to some extent to focusing on migration patterns in Malawi and other developing countries. So one of the trends that has been noted and expected in the future is increased urbanization in developing countries like Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, but also Southeast Asia. So whereas I think at one point human population was predominantly rural, over the next 50 years it's expected to be majority urban residents. So I'm looking at the influence of that on things like social networks, on individual health, as well as just general migration patterns within these developing countries. The first is don't shy away from challenges. I think getting a B in a challenging class could end up leading to more skills and giving you a better knowledge than getting an A in a class that's easy. So I think thinking about it in that way and maybe using that philosophy to guide your approach to choosing classes could be something that would help you out over the long term. And as a corollary to that, I think once you finish school, once you finish your MPH or your PhD, that doesn't mean that learning ends. So you're going to continue to learn in your job, and similarly, accepting more challenging positions in your job will eventually lead to better skills and probably be more useful and lead to a more fruitful job. Second piece of advice is to really nurture and develop your social networks, because I think your classmates at Tulane, as well as your professors and other individuals you might interact with during your education here, are going to follow you after you graduate. So just as learning doesn't finish after you finish your coursework here, the social interactions and the friendships and professional relationships that you have don't end either. So it's likely that the professors and colleagues that you'll make here are going to interact with you later on, either through professional or personal networks. And I think at the end of a career, or as you move forward in your career, that might be something that you find the most valuable out of your experience overall.